thing I would like to draw your attention to in relation to this book is the image on the cover. One of the great inspirers of Armando's work, and of this book in particular, is Giambattista Vico. You have heard the name. Again, an Italian philosopher and philologist of the 18th century, who actually gave a lot of relevance to images as actually thought processes, and used, actually commissioned an image to stand at the beginning of his most famous work, The New Science. Armando didn't commission, I think, this photograph, but we can use it somehow to reflect on some of the themes that come up in the book in a way that, Vico himself would call poetic. There is a little bit less linked to the analytical elaboration, more work through images. So you might notice, if you haven't seen already, this is the photograph of a bridge in the Iranian city of Isfahan, taken at night. Half of the photograph is the actual bridge, and then there is a reflection. This bridge is called Pole Khojou, and it was built around 1650 on the orders of the Safavid ruler Shah Abbas II. And the Safavids play an important role actually in the book itself. Maybe the most striking immediate characteristic, at least that I note, is the electric lighting that sort of illuminates the bridge. A clear reference, in my view, to the question of modernity in the book, and electricity is what there could be a more sort of clear emblem of modernity. And it's a modernity that, as you can see, has no clear source of illumination. It's kind of a diffuse but very bright source in a bridge that's clearly built before the time where electricity was invented or discovered. The image, however, is also very important because it's a bridge. And as has been already remembered, this is a book that seriously engages the idea of building a bridge between the social sciences and sociology on one side of the shore, and Islamic studies, or as Armando, and I think quite nicely actually calls it in the book, Orientalism, on the other side. We know, thanks also to the discussion in Armando's book, that these two shores are very, very distant. Actually, the idea of the battlefield, it's relevant, but they also have, it's another term that you will find recurring in the text itself, a very entangled history. And I think the book is an effort in this entanglement. I am sure that if you have walked across bridges, and if you have walked across Pole Khojou even more so, you would know that a bridge is not just a neutral connecting point, but it's actually a very important architectural piece and infrastructure in itself. And actually, I think this brings me to what, in my view, is one of Armando's main, I would call it perspective in the discussion of Islam, but also of social theory in general, which is this idea of connection. The idea of a relationship and connection is very deeply discussed and tackled in the book. By connection here, one has to understand not just a sense, but I agree, of course, of solidarity and sharedness and brotherhood, but also animosity, fight, and sort of contrastive engagement, let's say. This is really, I think, at the core of what, at least in my reading, Armando wants to focus our attention on. And this idea of power knowledge, in my view, is what he calls the power knowledge equation, is another way to re-describe this question of connection. And of course, you've heard my previous presenters discussed the notion of civility, which is in some way an explicit realization of this question of connection. The bridge, built in 1650, again, was not just a mean of passage, it was itself a site of socialization. It was used for public recreations, and there are walkways you can see people walking actually even today in the shades, because there is a system to protect people from the sun. But it was also a site of public but also courtly spectacle for the Shah, who organized public celebrations and entertainment on the bridge. And as you heard already, this kind of courtly life, this kind of courtly sociality, which combines again power and knowledge, is a foundational element for Armando Salvatore's view of what Islam is. And here he discusses at length in the book what he calls, as following also the middle periods of especially the three great empires, the Ottoman, Safavids, and the Mughals, as kind of exemplifying this form of society, which this bridge in some way really clearly illustrates. Let me just play a little bit more with the idea of the bridge by telling you that in the central pavilion, where there's still visible today a lot of decorations, there were much more paintings which then kind of got lost or damaged through the ages. Some of them had erotic scenes of sexuality, but there were also calligraphies with moral admonishments in this pavilion, and one of them I think speaks quite well to the concerns of the book again, as I see them from my sort of marginal anthropological angle. This is a verse that the famous 17th century traveler, some of you might know, Jean Chardin, read on the bridge, now disappeared. So we only have this kind of non-authentic voice in which translation of this interesting, I suppose it's a verse. The world is truly a bridge. Pass over it. Wait and measure all that you meet with on your passage. Everywhere evil encompasses the good and transcends. There is a lot of discussion about good and evil in the book, and morality as a very important force in this making and unmaking, I would say, of connections. From this picture that I described, I would like to add something to what has already been said in terms of the cover, but of course the image, but of course the content of the book. It seems to me that one important perspective to approach this text, at least in my view, is the idea that Islam here is not an object of study. This is not a book. This is not a sociological book that takes theory in order to study a phenomenon, and a historical phenomenon, i.e. Islam. But it's in some way quite the opposite. It's a book that takes Islam to be a concept, a theoretical concept in some way, that can help us to understand better certain relationships, certain connections and misconnections, but also can help us understand or think differently about sociology. And that's why maybe here I differ a little bit from the take of civility of the other commenters, because I don't see necessarily, this is an interesting point and I will get to it in my sort of concluding remarks, I don't see civility as a historical realization as such, but I see civility as a heuristic concept. So for me, the idea of thinking of the success or decline of civility, this is my own interpretation, doesn't really work with the kind of analytical work that Armando Salvatore is trying to do in the book, where civility is more scaffolding for us to, or Islam is a scaffolding for us to think about civility as an ever-present possibility, that it's both historically realized but also kind of suspended above time. And here I get to my sort of last point that I have to use, the image again. This bridge was not just a pleasure bridge, or it was not even just a bridge that united two sides of the shores of the imperial capital of Isfahan, but it was also a dam. And nowadays it's not really used as a dam, but it was a very sophisticated hydraulic mechanism to divert and control the flux of water. This was done to irrigate gardens, but it was also done to create a pool between this bridge and the next bridge that was further along downstream, and so to create a lake that again was used for public recreation. Why do I think the notion of the dam is important? It's again to think about the relationship between power and knowledge in Armando's theorization. There is something here about containment in the book that is very, very important. Armando utterly dislikes psychoanalytic language, I know, but there's something about the play of desire and the containment of desire which has to do with civility that I think, at least helped me understand this question of the dam. And whether the dam, we can think of the dam, and therefore the shoring, there's passages in the book, I can tell you the page, I don't remember, where he talks about shoring the waves of civility. This operation of shoring and habituation and in some way control is for him a very important mechanism in the making of what he calls a civility. Now remember, I know you haven't read the book, probably it's quite complicated, but civility is not civilization. It's actually quite two distinct conceptual frameworks. And this question of the dam, I see it as a very interesting image to think about what Armando does with the venerable Weberian tradition to which he belongs and to which he both pays homage in the book and to which he constantly kind of tries to disrespect and diverge from and fight against. And again, this idea of the dam where there's a containment of a certain Weberian push and stream of rationalization, this idea of what he calls the civilizing process, whereby all behaviors and in some way thoughts are kind of grinded into this mechanism that puts them into discipline. And here again, probably he might disagree, but I see this kind of containment as struggling a little bit with this more Giambattista Vico kind of trajectory, which brings into the process of civilization a lot of tension and strife and conflict and fight, and in some way brings into it a lot of irrationality. To put it simplistically maybe, but a lot of poetry, which is a particular kind of rationality, but is not the analytic, systematic, disciplining kind of rationality that Weber was thinking about. And there is a tension, I think, in the book itself. I read this book several times. In my last read, I came to the conclusion that Weber, unfortunately, from my anthropological side of things, as actually the upper side over Vico. That Weber, the German, northern tradition gets a little bit too harsh on Vico's effort to reopen this kind of alternative. And
so you're analyzing me.
No.